Roundtabling, we welcome in the pride of Florida's First Coast, Ryan Lavner, alongside Joel Beall, a senior writer at Golf Digest. Joel, I want to start with you on this fall series. I know it's kind of a mishmash. It was kind of patched together as things evolved, as the season was kind of taking shape. Do you think it's working? Because we have a situation where guys like Aaron Baddeley this week, for instance, who is 96th on the FedExCup list, desperate for these starts to make his way up. He's not even in the field this week in Mexico. It seems as though there are a lot of changes that need to be made going forward. But to this point, does it work for you?
You know, compared to what the fall was, which was essentially a regular season that was treated as a quiet quitting offseason by most of the tour stars, I think confining the fall to its own league of sorts can help this part of the calendar have its own identity. At least the foundation is there. In execution, though, it's not there yet because what we're seeing this fall is just a byproduct of kind of what you mentioned, making these overarching decisions on the fly without proper one-way. You mentioned Baddeley. I think the Dylan Wu case a couple weeks ago is a perfect example of the current problems with this format. If the PGA Tour is going to make this a true qualifying stretch, it needs to have the real-time category reshuffles rather than genuflecting to a list that's already out of date by this point of the year. That's the simple fix. To me, the bigger issue that doesn't have an easy answer is what to do with the players who have already finished in the top 50 of the FedExCup. You know, those players have earned the right to be here with their play. And with money and world rankings on the line, it's not like these events are merely practice reps for them. In that same token, these players are kind of needed by the events during the fall to help sell and market these events to the public. But the presence of these top players kind of undercuts the very reason why we're supposed to be playing in the fall. And, you know, Baddeley is a good example. We're taking away field spots from guys whose careers could be in jeopardy. So normally I'm very much in the play better camp, but I think this has a little bit more nuance to it. I think it's a good problem for the tour to have. I think this is going in the right direction. It needs a little time to get where it's going.
I'm with Joe. I don't think the fall has necessarily worked, at least to this point. Like the list of winners has been great. Sahith, Tom Kim, Colin Morikawa, Ludwig Aubert lost in the playoff. But this fall series was not designed for those guys. This was supposed to be some cutthroat battle for status, and that hasn't really translated to this point, at least in my viewing experience. You know, it's hard to, at least for me, engender much sympathy or emotion for players who have already had 30 or so cracks to try and secure their status for 2024, or now players who are trying to get into that small category of qualifying for the first two signature events of 2024. That said, you know, I'm looking forward to covering the RSM. That's the new cutoff event for the 125. It's very much going to be like the Wyndham Championship, which always provides that end of season drama. I'm looking forward to covering Q School in December with that traditional pathway for the dreamers and schemers to get on the PGA Tour. But as currently constituted, no, I think the PGA Tour fall is in need of some serious tweaks.
Last, speaking of dreamers, Michael Block, one of the great stories of 2023, earning his way in exemptions this week in Mexico, next year in the California desert. Where do you see this story? Because there was a time where the man could have run for president and won by 30 points, but some seem to be wearying of this storyline.
Well, look, I certainly understand the fatigue. It seems like we're in hour 3 of what should have been his 15 minutes of fame. But he keeps winning tournaments. These tournaments are coming with automatic exemptions into PGA Tour events. He's already earned a spot in the American Express in 2024. He was the Southern California Player of the Year. He's going to be playing in the Australian Open in a couple months' time. And you're right. Most of the blowback stems from his omnipresence on social media. But I don't think it's necessarily Michael Block's fault that his story seems to resonate with influential figures in either sports media or kind of influential folks from the music industry like DJ Khaled. Like, if you don't want Michael Block to be playing in PGA Tour events any longer, or you're sick of him, just beat him, because right now he's earning a spot in these fields, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Look, I would go a step further. You know, listen, since the PGA blocking mania, it's kind of felt like that 30-year-old returning to high school with his Letterman jacket and Marlboro Reds, reminiscing about that district title so many falls ago. But you know what? The past 2 years of golf have been so fraught with moral dilemmas and existential crisis and greed. why not just lean in and enjoy this ridiculous man that won't go away? So I think we actually need more Blocky. I want his thoughts on the framework agreement. I want him to campaign for the U.S. Ryder Cup captaincy at that page. I will want him to publicly volunteer to fix the feud between Brooks Koepka and Matthew Wolff. So, let this man keep living the dream. People seem to be enjoying it. I'm done being cynical about Blocky.
Well, speaking of guys who've been told to go away, last week the PGA Tour suspended 2 players for violating the gambling policy, betting on professional golf events. They did specify that these players didn't bet on events that they actually competed in, and that's pretty much where the details ended. I'm curious, Lav, where do you think this falls in terms of on the transparency scale? Is the Tour obligated to actually tell us on what tournaments they bet, the amounts that they bet, whether it was a one-off or a pattern of betting? Because when you look back at the Ben An suspension a couple of weeks ago, they went out of their way to state that the banned substance he took in violating the anti-doping policies was available in cough medicine from Korea. These guys were not given any context as to why the Tour arrived at the decision it arrived at. Is more transparency needed here?
Yes, and that's been a common complaint in regards to the PGA Tour over the past couple of decades. Obviously, these players broke the rules. They're well aware that they broke the rules, and they should be punished. It's unfortunate because these 2 players now have the avenue of Q School that is closed for them. Where I take issue, I think where you take issue is with the announcement. It was a 104-word press release announcing this suspension, and the only crucial context was that they basically just outlined these players did not gamble on tournaments in which they were competing. Left unanswered was how many events in which they were gambling, how much were they betting, how were these violations discovered. To me, Eamon, in this brave new world, the Tour owes it to the Tour members and the sporting public to provide the circumstances for which these players were suspended. I actually think it would behoove the PGA Tour, in all honesty, to let fans know that there's not sort of any rampant impropriety among the players. You're not necessarily making an example of them if you provide more details. If anything, I think it could be an educational moment for everybody, for the players, for tour officials, for the fans, and for people who want to believe in the PGA Tour product.
Totally agree, Lav. I mean, whether the PGA Tour realizes it or not, they just dragged 2 guys' reputations through the mud for something we're not even sure was that big of a problem. Now, I understand this is not just a PGA Tour issue. We've seen dozens of players receive suspensions with the National Football League the past 2 years regarding gambling-related issues. Obviously, the NBA really sidestepped a huge scandal with the referee Tim Dahen a couple of years ago. I'm from Cincinnati, and the town is still mourning Pete Rose's banishment from baseball, but 30 years ago. So gambling is now infused with professional sports, and you're not getting that horse back in the barn, right? So if you're the PGA Tour, you have to at least maintain the optics of integrity. But, man, by doing this and not telling us what exactly these guys were suspended for, you're kind of undercutting the very thing you think you're protecting. I also think you can make the case these guys are scapegoats for a message the PGA Tour feels like it needs to send its members, which is, hey, you cannot get in this realm the way the current structure is partnered up. The only thing I'd ask for the PGA Tour is to have the same type of vigilance towards its players, toward the fans. We've seen it, Lav, me and you, the past couple of years, being out at these events, having fans yell things at certain players regarding gambles or wagers they've made on these players. I wish the Tour would have the same type of vigilance towards the spectators.
Lav, how about the optics in this situation, considering the PGA Tour has a partnership with DraftKings? It's the official betting operator, brick-and-mortar shop right next to TPC Scottsdale. Can you imagine what that scene's going to be like a couple months from now? How difficult is balancing the optics while also handing out these suspensions while having a relationship with betting operators?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a murky new world that the PGA Tour is trying to navigate through in real time. You mentioned the player integrity program. You mentioned the tour sponsorships. To me, a big one is the prospect of having an injury list like other sports do. Maverick McNeely is playing this week in Cabo. It's his first start in 5 months after shoulder surgery. He was playing much of the fall while having a torn ligament in his shoulder. Should that sort of information have been made known public so gamblers can make the best decision. Those are the sorts of calls that the PGA Tour, I think, is going to have to make as it sort of modernizes its product and gets in line with the NFL, the NBA, and the other major sports organizations.
Joel, this is an interesting argument here. As Billy Walters says, he's in the information business, not in the gambling business. And in the course of being at a tour event and credentialed at a tour event, that information comes to people, which is why the tour's integrity policy applies to players, to agents, to caddies, to trainers, anyone who's in that orbit. Is there any reason why it shouldn't apply to media as well? Why should golf media, who are potentially going to pick up the same information in the course of their work, why should they be exempt from that, and instead of being told you can't bet on what you know from the inside as well?
I think they shouldn't be exempt. Just at the exact moment or the exact situation as you mentioned. If you're going to be in this world, you need to refrain from any gambling type of endeavors. And I know that's tough given that so much of media right now has either a gambling sponsorship or gambling advice. It's a new world, but it's a tricky world, and things can go sideways really quick. And I'm with you. I think that these same things should apply to the media. And if I seem a little scattered, I can't believe that Block hasn't received a DraftKings ad yet. So that's where my mind is.